What's going on, everybody? We are back with the Podstrosities podcast. I'm Lady Rebellium, your host as usual. Not sick, totally not sick. I promise. Maybe a little bit sick. I'm also very bright. Ooh, I'm very bright. Make it less bright. Today we're gonna be talking about our personal best films of 2019. This is not necessarily something that is based in all of like the Oscar nominations, but we kind of got inspired by them since, obviously everyone gives a crap about the Oscars every year. And so we kind of wanted to talk about like our own personal best films of 2019. They may not have even been nominated, but it is essentially what we think is like the best from last year. Because we thought it'd be interesting to have like a Monstrosities Award kind of thing. You know what I mean? What's going on, everybody? Hello. So I'll go ahead and join my fellows here in the voice chat. If anyone wants to join us, by the way, definitely hit us up. I can do the Discord link here. We are a streaming community, of course. So if you're interested, we do this kind of podcast thing all the time. So there you go. Hello, hello. If anyone wants to join us, let me know. Just hop in the VC. Just be like, hey, yo, I got ideas. Hello.
Hi.
Hello.
How's everybody doing today?
I'm ill.
Everyone's so sick. It's making me sad.
I'm doing okay.
That's good. At least Tom is okay, because maybe he can like pull us through this whole discussion. Everyone else is just falling apart. Cool. So yeah, today we're just gonna be talking about what we think is personally our best film of 2019, just because, everyone does like Oscar noms and things like that, but we may have our own personal idea of what we think is the best when it comes to film. Because I mean, I'm sure we've all seen a lot of different things over the last year that may not have even been nominated. So I'm curious to see what you guys think is your own personal best. And we'll kind of, I guess, decide at the end if we want to give like a Monstrosities Award for Best Film of the Year. I think that might be kind of fun, and do a little vote. So yeah. Bagman, if you would like to kindly go first with what you think is the best film of the entire 2019 year.
In my personal opinion, the best film of 2019 is John Wick 3: Parabellum.
Oh, snaps. I forget that came out last year.
Yeah, actually, I did go over a whole list of what came out, and I'm like, damn, I saw a lot more movies than I.
Yeah, right? I know, and I was looking through like lists of like what, people just said were like the best through like Metacritic or whatever else. But like, yeah, like just thinking of just regular movies, even not even like ones that were like critically acclaimed or whatever. It's like I don't even remember. What did I even watch? But that's a good pick. Like I again totally forgot that was even last year. It feels like forever. But yeah, why do you think that, like, in your own like terms, why is that the best film for you?
Well, I mean, I just love the John Wick series, and it was just a really good film. I thought the story was good, and it's got good violence.
Good violence. So you hold violence in very high esteem.
Oh yes, it's one of the many only things I critique films on.
Should we be scared?
Possibly.
Possibly. Yeah, I really, really, really enjoyed John Wick. All of them have kind of been like about as good as the last one, which isn't very typical for, like sequels in particular, like the first one was obviously very good, and I think it kind of became its own like cult classic situation. And then they just kept making more, and I kind of got worried because whenever they make sequels of stuff that I really like, I'm just like, oh god, it's never going to be as good. But then they came out and I was like, oh no, these are still pretty damn good. Like there's obviously it's not going to be one of those that's like Oscar nominated or whatever, but just in terms of like, fighting film and things like that, I think they did a really good job. So I've been very impressed. But the last one in particular, like I think they keep ramping up like the set pieces and things like that for these movies every single time. So I think they just kind of continue to get better, like, visually, and they keep, like, getting more and more money to throw in, like, other celebrity stars and things like that, which I think is kind of cool.
The John Wick movies definitely are on my to watch list. I still haven't seen any of them.
Oh.
How dare you?
I mean, no,
What are
no
you ganged
shame,
up
because
on?
I mean, it's just one of those things where it's like, it kind of reminds me of like Mission Impossible and things like that, where it's like they keep coming out and people keep telling me to watch them, and I'm like, oh god, but there's like 8 of them. But yeah, no,
Only 6, but that's close.
that feels like 8. It feels like a million to me. But no, yeah, I at least there's only 3 of these, and I feel like you could probably find them at like a maybe like a Hulu situation or Netflix or something. But if you can't, I'm sure the rental's probably not too bad. But
It might be
John
on
Wick
definitely,
Amazon
3.
Prime, I think.
yeah,
John Wick 3 is
Prime,
on Netflix right now.
yeah. No, yeah, that's perfect. Yeah, if you can like find the other ones for like a cheap rental and then just like hop on like Netflix or something, I definitely recommend it. I think it's super good.
Yeah, I've heard so many good things, so it's definitely on my to-do.
To watch list. Yeah, for sure. I as long as you're okay with dead puppies, then you'll be just fine.
It only happens once.
But it's so sad. Oh, it breaks
At
my
least
heart
it's
every
not a
time.
real puppy.
Breaks my heart. Um, man, yeah, I cannot believe I forgot about that movie. I even like I have since like bought all of them on digital and stuff too because I love them so much. And Keanu Reeves just as a whole, I almost like every movie he's in. So I think they did a really good job of casting him in that because even though he's kind of like an older gentleman now, I feel like the action that they have in there is appropriate for his age. He's not doing cray flips like the Matrix anymore. It's very like realistic, like, gun fighting and things like that. Not a whole lot of like hand to hand. So I just like he's just like perfect for that, and he's just amazing. So definitely a good pick. Um, Tom, what is your top pick?
I definitely have to go with Avengers Endgame, even though I don't feel it's like
Ooh,
Marvel's best, or like I still think Infinity War was better, but definitely was my favorite movie of the year out of all the ones.
interesting. Okay, so how does that beat out like every other movie that came out last year?
Because I had pretty good emotions, some damn good acting, and then the fact also that it's culmination of a decade-long story. So, like, had all those factors working together, and they managed to pull it off in a reasonably good way, even though there's still a few things that I'm not the most thrilled with that I feel are flaws in the movie, but it's still, I mean, a lot of franchises nowadays trying to do shared universes, they can't even get past like a couple movies or in some cases even one movie. And Marvel's managed to still have an overall consistency over a decade, so that's just very impressive.
Yeah, and very like very interesting trying to pull together what like almost 30 movies or something into one cumulative come together like
I think
film.
it was 23, the
23.
23rd film,
I'm like really up in these numbers. Close enough.
or maybe it was the 22nd because maybe Spider-Man was 23. I don't remember, but
Yeah.
somewhere around there. Yeah,
Spider Man was 23.
Yeah, so definitely like ambitious trying to pull together all of these strings into a sweater. You know what I mean? Like and especially since they had the movie prior to that, almost kind of like this is the sequel of that movie or whatever, and making it even better considering that Infinity War was by itself like a very good movie as well. They had to wrap it up, and it's like, oh god, like how are they gonna pull this off, sort of thing. But I'd say they did a pretty good job, and considering that they're gonna have like a big battle scene with everybody in there, blah blah blah. It's kind of reminds me of like Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, where they're like everyone's here. Like for the most part, everyone was basically there, other than like the kind of random scattered few you get from like Netflix shows or like the very early movies and whatnot. But just from
Yeah.
like the universe that they have tried to build and like connect together and stuff like that. Definitely ambitious. It's one of those things where I know for myself personally, like obviously I like comic book movies and comic books and superheroes and things like that. So for people like me, it's definitely in the top, and it's not one of those things that's gonna be typically nominated for like an Oscar kind of thing. But just in terms of like the sort of bias I have for those sorts of movies, plus the fact that we've been with these same actors, same characters for however many years and stuff, like it's definitely like cool to see them all sort of come together into one cumulative movie. And I think that holds a lot of weight. Like I don't think it really got like as many nods as I expected from the Oscars, cuz even if you're not going to consider it for something like film of the year, still having like, considering all the sound effects, visual effects, even some of
Music
the
score.
acting, it's like I'm kind of surprised that I didn't see more. I want to say that Infinity War got nominated for more than this one did.
Yeah, I was surprised too that I figured it should have gotten more of even just like the generic or the technical,
Right.
categories more.
More something. Especially considering the ones prior, like yeah. But like I said, comic book people like us are going to appreciate it the most, I think. And I definitely think it's one of the best, if not the best, like comic book movie, hero movie that there is out right now. Even though it's kind of like one of those things where if you aren't savvy with all of the Marvel properties and whatnot, I don't think you'd be able to just like hop into it. You'd probably have to
Oh
at
yeah,
least
yeah,
watch
both.
like Infinity War and then Endgame. But
Yeah, both
um,
Infinity War and Endgame. Yeah, it requires you to definitely been watching most, if not all, of the movies in the whole Marvel
right,
Cinematic.
right, yeah, in the whole MCU, and so that's I think that's the only bar to entry for something like that is like you kind of have to have already really like loved those characters and gotten into their story and followed them throughout this whole saga or whatever, to really appreciate like what that movie means. And I'm really curious to know like where they go from here. It's kind of like with something like John Wick, they can continue just like with Mission Impossible, Fast and Furious, all of those. They just continue to keep making kind of like the same sort of movie with the same characters over and over, and people will still eat them all up because they're still so good. But with something like this, it's kind of like this was the pinnacle of everything that they have, built up over the years. And it's like, where are they gonna go now? They kind of have like, offshoot movies with Spider-Man and things like that, Black Widow, going back to the sort of like singular hero movie. But yeah, like this felt like the biggest moment, and now they have to like find ways to get another big moment. So I'll be really
Yeah, it's like
interested to
a new
see.
rebuilding phase coming up.
Yeah, exactly. That's kind of how it feels. Like it felt like they were building the pyramid. We reached the top, and now they like have to start a whole new pyramid or something. Especially considering that a lot of the actors, like that was kind of like it for them. Like that was like the last movie for their entire like Marvel career. At least that's kind of either the way it felt or that's like what they've said. Who knows if that's actually true, but that's also kind of interesting to consider that that might be the last time we even see some of those actors in that role.
It's
Um,
definitely the last time I think you're gonna have all the original Avengers working.
yeah, exactly. And it's like,
If any of them do appear in future movies, yeah, you're not gonna have like all of them together.
mhm. Yeah, it's almost like a send off. It kind of feels that way because something like Infinity War, you're building up, and it kind of ended on like sort of a somber note, but you knew that there was going to be another one. After this one, it's just kind of like you don't really know where it's going to go, and a lot of those characters you may not see again. It's kind of like it was a good send off, I think, for some of them, especially
Yeah, it,
like
it ends the chapter but doesn't stop the story.
right, yeah, exactly. Especially for, if they're gonna be there were some characters, I don't know how much we should get into spoilers because it's kind of an older movie at this point, but some of those characters like kind of like die, but then we're getting movies that are like I'm assuming in like the past, like in terms of like, you know, Black Widow and things like that. So it's kind of like they may not truly be gone, but at least like I said, for some of them that have straight up said like I'm not doing another one. It's kind of like, well shit, like this is your last chance to really catch them in that role and see like where their story ends or whatever. So I think they wrapped up the entire like saga really well. And obviously graphically and everything else, it was freaking fantastic. You could tell that they really put in a lot of work, a lot of money to make that all sort of work together. And getting all those stars in one place honestly is kind of like a big feat in itself, you know.
Well, actually, they didn't even do that. You hear about how they shot that movie. A lot of the actors didn't work with the other actors and stuff too. They shot at separate times
They just
because they
kind of
just
paced
tried
them in.
so hard to keep stuff secret.
Yeah, that makes sense too. I mean, it's not necessarily like literally all of them in the same room, I guess, but even just being able to pull all of them, period. Like there's a lot of big actors in those movies, and so it's kind of like, you know, being able to get them all in one place to shoot this gigantic movie is kind of like a feat in itself. Like you don't really see that a whole lot. Occasionally you get sort of like, you know, big casts making a big movie or whatever, but never really on this scale and from pulling from so many different places with all those different characters that they have. So, like I said, very ambitious. I think it pulled it off really well, and I'll be interested to see kind of like where they go from there because
It also marked another end of an era as the last Stan Lee cameo.
yeah, yeah, for sure. It almost feels like that was the proper end sort of for like that arc of all of his like characters and things like that. So a lot of significance. Like again, like I feel like even if, you know, people who are voting for like Oscars and things like that like don't really care about like superhero movies in general, it's just like it was kind of just a big feat in itself. Like I don't know, I just feel like it needs to get some kind of nod. I don't know what for. Maybe not for the whole like overall film of the year or whatever, but something. But I'm glad that we were at least are able to kind of bring it up and give it some love because it definitely deserves it.
It's holding the record as the highest grossing movie of all time. So it's
Yeah,
got that
that
award
too.
that, you know,
Just
and it's
yeah,
going to
it's
take a while for somebody to take.
yeah, it's like breaking all of these different like barriers and stuff. Like it's I don't know. I think it's definitely like the pinnacle right now of superhero movies. That people are gonna be like hard pressed to pass that up. So yeah, that's a really good pick. For me personally, I feel like I hate to bring up like another like comic booky movie, but I'd have to say that last year, if I were to pick just like one movie to call my movie of the year, it would probably have to be The Joker. And I know that we have a lot of Joker fans in our
Mm,
Discord and everywhere else, but I almost feel biased picking it just because I know that like once again like with Endgame, not everyone's gonna be sort of like in that vein of like comic book like fans and whatnot. But the thing about Joker was almost just like it didn't feel like a comic book movie in the sense that we have seen them so far. And I felt like even if you didn't know shit about Batman and Joker and DC and all of that, you know, backstory, you could just watch that movie and enjoy it for what it was, even just as like a good movie. And so I kind of appreciated that, just because I think, and I also kind of think that's why it got like so many like Oscar nods as well. Is just because like it wasn't really bogged down in all of that like sort of fandom. It was more just like its own standalone thing. Now I don't know if they're gonna end up making like a sequel to it. I kind of wish they
They
wouldn't.
its
I
sequel is confirmed.
Yeah, I
Gross.
say there's no way in hell that the Warner Brothers is going to pass up on a sequel given how much money the first one made. Like
Yeah.
even if nobody involved with the first one wanted to be there, like you know the Warner Brothers the studios are going to want to capitalize.
Yeah. That's what sucks about it is like, you know, when you have something like Endgame or even something like John Wick where it's like obviously they're making money and they're really popular. It's like it's still kind of it makes sense to continue those stories, especially Endgame. Obviously, you have to see the end of like all of those different like stories pulled together and whatnot. But something about Joker just kind of was beautiful, I thought, on its own, and I thought it could stand on its own, just as like this very like psychologically disturbed guy, and you don't really even know like how it's ending. You don't even know if what you saw was real, but that was kind of like the beauty of it, was that you didn't have to like, I mean, a lot of people were even saying that like they didn't need to make any nods toward Bruce Wayne or the Wayne family or anything. It could have just totally been like the Joker story.
Yeah, that's like the thing that I dislike the most about the movie is basically like you're talking about how it didn't feel like a comic book movie. It's basically any of that comic book aspect. It didn't need to be Gotham City. You didn't need the Waynes in there. Like
Mm-hmm.
none of that was pertinent to the story, and it just felt like they were trying to tack that on just to try to pull in a comic book crowd. And
Yeah.
I just felt it would have been like a lot better if it was just a movie about a guy with mental health problems that gets, abused and neglected and pushed to the edge.
Yeah, totally. And I can super like appreciate that as well, cuz that was something that kind of I think brought me out of it in a way, which is kind of weird considering that, the character is supposed to be like a DC character. This is someone that we do know something about, and he has all these ties to, Batman and everything else, Gotham, Arkham, all of that stuff. But it is kind of like a delicate balance, I think, and this could be why it didn't really like win the entire like award or whatever season, because they did have to sort of walk that line between this is just going to be like its own standalone like beautiful story of this like very tragic like man versus, oh, but we got to throw in a bunch of comic book stuff and make it obvious that this is the Joker that people know, this is Gotham that people know, these are the Waynes that everyone knows, like. And that I think might have given it a little bit of like a schizophrenia almost, where you're constantly bouncing between just seeing like Joaquin Phoenix doing his thing versus like, oh, but now you got this like comic book stuff that you got to think about, and then it gets you wondering like, what's gonna happen to little Bruce? Is he gonna be Batman? Blah blah blah. And it's like that wasn't really like the point, It's like we didn't need any of it really. Even if it had just been set in Gotham and mentions Arkham and things like that, I don't know that we really needed like the Waynes in particular. It could have been any politician, and I think it would have worked just fine. But yeah, it did feel like they were kind of torn between like, okay, how much do we make this into like the actual like Joker story, and how much do we just kind of make this a good ass movie, that could stand on its own 2 feet.
Plus, you're talking about, having the Waynes in there that it could have been any politician. It's like also another reason is the way they depicted Thomas Wayne is like nothing the way he's always been traditionally depicted, that he's always been, a caring, considerate, compassionate man and very generous. And, it's kind of like how Jonathan Kent's supposed to instill all the good qualities into Clark Kent. That's like Thomas Wayne, besides the fact of being traumatized by his parents' death. It's like how generous and compassionate his parents are and all the charities they were
Mm-hmm.
involved in and stuff, that they didn't just, hoard their wealth or use their wealth to be like, we're better people. They always use their money to try to make Gotham and the world better for other people. And that's, partly of what had an influence on Bruce. And that's something that, they didn't have in that movie too. That's kind of another reason why maybe they should have not had the comic book aspect stuff in there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because it did kind of like, I think that was also like part of them sort of being like, this is a whole different universe than like what we've seen in, Dark Knight and things like that. It's like this is a different Joker. We have a very different like Wayne family. Obviously we don't really know much about like what's going to happen with like Bruce or anything like that. But yeah, like I kind of appreciated but also hated the liberties that they took with it, because it was like, I like that they're trying to take chances and they're making a different kind of Joker. They're making a different kind of Wayne family, and like what, like you said, like he was kind of like, ended up being like a dick politician. Whereas that's not really like what we're used to seeing, whether we are talking about like cartoons, comics, whatever else, talking about like the Wayne family. But at the same time, it's like I don't know how I feel about it, because yeah, it went against everything that I knew, but at the same time, maybe that was sort of the point. This almost feels like they're trying to make a uh, sort of altered universe of Jokers or something like that, where it's like, oh, but this would happen. This is what would happen if like the Wayne family was like a bunch of dickhead politicians kind of thing. And so I was kind of like okay with it, but at the same time a little uncomfortable, because again, like you're going into this movie, like whether they wanted you to or not, you're gonna go into this movie having your own like predetermined ideas for what it's gonna be. You already have the knowledge of what has been built up from, you know, the years of Batman and everything else that you've consumed. So it's just kind of like it's got to be hard for them to sort of suss out what this movie is supposed to be based off of that, because you know you're dealing with, what is it, like 80 something years or something of Batman stuff, of Batman knowledge, and then having to basically tear that down and be like, no, this is like a different story now. We're leaving everything else behind. This is the story we want to tell with it. So it's hard for me to kind of figure out my feelings on that, because like I said, this movie didn't really feel like a comic book movie in the same sense that the other ones did. All of the Batman films, even, you know, the Marvel stuff that they've done, it didn't feel like that at all. None of them have sort of reached that like height of acting capability and like sort of kind of like weird, you know, vibes and shit, like very like, I don't know, not even really knowing like what is real and what is fake. Like the whole thing could have all been in like a dream almost. Like it's just like that's not typical for comic book movies. Usually it's the same thing where it's just like good guy versus bad guy. Usually the good guy is going to win at the end and you go on your merry way and you fight the next guy. It's just like this was something else. So it's really hard for me to kind of put it in that same bucket. It's also kind of why I really liked it, and I think that's why a lot of people sort of nominated that for the Oscars for many different things, because even just by itself, even if you have to forget everything you know about like Batman and Joker and Gotham and everything, I think it just was a good movie just in general. Did have a lot of like, did we need that in there sort of feelings, but at the same time, like just looking at the Joker character, like just specifically, I think it, minus everything else, I think Joaquin Phoenix did a really good job, sort of pulling like what Heath Ledger and like other people have done before, but kind of turning it into more of like a psychological sort of thriller instead. It's kind of like what I'm hoping that Marvel sort of takes in the future with like Doctor Strange and Morbius and other movies like that are kind of like darker and not necessarily very like shiny and clean like a Captain America movie, just something that's a little more twisted. I really enjoyed that sort of aspect about it, because in the end, like it, you know, you always kind of get that vibe that like Joker, you know, as a character, he's just like a little messed up in the head, and this was like sort of exploring that psychological impact, as well as like sort of the beginnings of like where that even spawned from, but just taking it to like the next level, because this definitely isn't the Joker that's like, I'm gonna pull out a gun and it goes bang kind of thing. This is definitely more like, no, I'm gonna murder some bitches because they made fun of me kind of thing. Like it's dark.
Well, Todd Phillips has stated that he said too that, you know, like he's not saying it one way or the other, but that the Joaquin Phoenix character there of Arthur, what the hell? I was gonna say Arthur Morgan. That's Red Dead Redemption 2. Arthur Fleck. I couldn't think of his last name, but saying that it may not, you know, be the comic book Joker, but just somebody who ends up becoming the inspiration for the Joker Batman villain down the road.
Yeah, totally, and I could see that too, because it really just kind of felt like it even felt like something like almost mirroring current like society, and how even just like one person makes a difference and spawns this entire like, you know, anarchy sort of like feeling for the masses. It's like, yeah, I could totally see that as well. it just had like a lot of like sort of, like like psychological bombs of just like putting a mirror up to society and seeing like what we see reflected back, sort of thing. It was very like I don't know, psychological in that way, I guess. Like it was just like it really didn't feel like a character's origin story or anything like that. Like I said, like what we've seen before. It just kind of like, I don't know. It's almost like they used the guise of the Joker to just basically make a good movie. It could have They could have completely taken out like the all the name dropping of all of the different Batman properties and things like that, and like just named him something else, and it still would have been a really good movie, I think. Which is like really the most interesting part to me. Is like, did they have to use the Joker? Could they just completely taken all of that out and pretended that it was something else?
Well, that's what I was gonna say too, though. Is like it's a double-edged sword because I
Mm-hmm.
think if it didn't have the Joker name, I don't think it would have pulled in as much money, even though it still would have been the same movie, the same quality. I don't think it would have gotten as much attention as it did.
Yeah, no, and that is a very good point.
I wouldn't have watched it if it wasn't called Joker.
Yeah,
Yeah, I probably would have. Yeah, I probably wouldn't have. Like maybe I would have checked it out later down the road or something like that. If somebody's like, "Hey, this is a really good movie," but it's probably not one that I would have gone out of my way to go.
yeah, and I that's probably exactly. I mean, it always comes back to we got to make the most money out of these movies, especially from like the DC side where they kind of have had like a string of stinkers. So it's like they're trying to sort of bring that back with these like offshoot stories, and I would say like for the most part they've been pretty successful doing that. So of course, it kind of comes down to brass tacks, like how are we gonna get the most people in the door? Oh, we're gonna call this the Joker, sort of thing. So like I said, it creates a sort of schizophrenia between like what it wants to be versus like what it had to be, which I think is why a lot of people had a hard time sort of nominating that as their best film because it couldn't quite decide what it wanted to be. But I do think even just calling it a comic book movie was still perfectly fine for me, just because like holding it up to all of the different Marvel films and things like that, it does something different, and I'm always about like taking these different IP and making something different out of them, because like we've seen so many origins of characters like Batman and stuff like that, where it's like we do crave something different, and I think this definitely brought it.
Well, it's got to be different in a good way though too, because
Yeah.
go back to our Star Wars discussion. We've seen different with the Last Jedi, and that didn't work.
Yeah, for sure. And there's definitely like there's a
Like
way to
different for
just
the
kind
sake of
of,
different doesn't always work.
yeah, there's a way to like run with it. The problem is that, you know, people I don't think people really know like how to take some of these properties and just completely turn it on its head. I think people try a lot and fail. And especially like with something like Star Wars, it's like you're in the midst of like a trilogy. You got to continue these stories that were already built prior to you. It is really hard to do something completely different and call it the same trilogy. And I'm glad that they allowed them the license to make a separate movie that had absolutely nothing to do with Dark Knight or any other sort of Batman. It may or may not have something to do with the R-Pat's Batman coming up, but even if it
I
does,
doubt it, but I mean,
I doubt it too. And I
ultimately
kind of,
Warner
again,
Brothers.
I hope that they don't. I really just hope they leave this alone. If they're going to make a sequel, I hope it's still the same caliber of like, how good this was. I really, really kind of wish they would just leave this alone, though. It felt like a piece of art that it's like when someone, when a famous painter makes a famous painting, if they made that, but like part two, it's just kind of like, well, that's never going to live up to the first one, and it's not like something we necessarily needed. And I know that they're going to do it because of the money, but I kind of just hope that this was going to be its own standalone thing. It's definitely not. It just doesn't have the same sort of vibes as like, they wanted to make a Joker movie from the Suicide Squad Joker, and even that, like, no one really asked for it, but I could also see why they would make another one. There's a lot of like unanswered questions of where that Joker even came from and what the hell he's even doing.
So a lot of people think that it's Jason Todd, and the real Joker still.
Yeah, it's I don't know. This one just it just felt different, and it just didn't feel like anything like we've had before. And I really don't want them to sort of shoehorn it into something like the Arpats movies, just cause it's there, sort of thing. But we'll see. I mean, even if this is just like really good, and then they make a sequel, and then it's just like stupid, and they're trying to do a bunch of like I don't even know if Joaquin would even like do a bunch of combination movies with like Batman and things like that. I don't know what would happen with that, but
I don't know because Marvel originally wanted him for Doctor Strange, and he wanted to do the movie, but the reason he ended up not doing it was because he didn't want to sign on for multiple movies. Because
yeah,
he's one of the ones that doesn't like doing sequels. He doesn't want to keep playing the same
exactly.
character multiple.
Exactly, because I think he sort of realizes like the power of just doing one really good part, like one really good movie that stands alone and you don't need anything else. I think he's really good at doing that. So yeah, I can't see him coming back over and over and over again to do the same thing because after a while, like I think it's just gonna lose its luster after a while. Like even if we had gotten Heath Ledger as the Joker over and over, that one like Dark Knight movie was just so like good. I think if he had just kept doing the same Joker thing, while I would have loved to see him continue to do that role, after a while it just kind of doesn't feel the same anymore. So,
Yeah, well, it's kind of like Deadpool. When the first one came
yeah.
around, it was really, fresh and something that we hadn't seen in a while, if at all. And you do Deadpool 2. Like, I like Deadpool 2, but in some ways, it doesn't necessarily feel as good as the first one because
Hmm.
it doesn't feel as like fresh and original as the first one because you already had that.
And so many people compare movies like that to Deadpool, like the original. Like I've heard a lot of people say, like these Suicide Squad, like the original, and then the Harley Quinn and all those. They're all kind of trying to capture what was great about that first Deadpool movie. But yeah, you're right. Like after making so many Deadpools, so many Suicide Squads, those sort of movies, like after a while, yeah, like it's not special anymore. They're all doing it. It's like they're all being like R rated and crazy and yeah, it's like it's lightning in a bottle. And I don't think you're gonna capture that again with Joker. I can definitely appreciate this movie, even if they came out with a sequel and all that. Like I probably won't like it as much, and at least we have this movie to fall back on as like an Oscar nominated, Oscar winning in some cases movie. And so that's kind of like in a nutshell why that was my favorite movie, even barring all of the comic book references. As much as I sort of appreciate them as like a fan, I also could have just seen this movie and had absolutely no connections and still enjoyed it, I think. So that's why it's kind of my favorite for last year.
Just to add in something real quick though, too, you're mentioning like the Harley Quinn Birds of Prey movie that just came out there and stuff.
Hmm.
It's just really funny that when Walter Hamada took over running DC Films, Joker was the first movie that he greenlit, and from the studio perspective, it was a big, huge risk because it's not part of the cinematic universe. It's different. It's not your traditional kind of comic book movie, and that was the one they were nervous about. So then to kind of counterbalance that, that's why Walter Hamada greenlit Birds of Prey. When kept bumping around what kind of movie they were going to do, but ended up going with the Birds of Prey thing or something like that. And that was the movie that they felt was going to be the sure hit. That was going to be the movie. And if Joker didn't work out, Birds of Prey was going to compensate for its losses. And it turned out to be the complete opposite. That Joker
Yeah.
was the smash hit, and Birds of Prey is the one that needed Joker to kind of compensate for its losses.
Hmm. I know, and it's funny how those kinds of things work out, but I hope that this sort of spurs them to continue to take creative chances. I know it is really hard, especially when you're using like such a beloved IP and you got a lot of money on the line. But if anything, I hope Joker shows them that they can take some more creative license with some of these different characters. I don't expect something like the Robert Pattinson Batman movie to take the similar sort of chances that this Joker movie did, because I know that they kind of have to they're trying to make what the MCU did, essentially. They're trying to make like superhero trilogies and whatever else that can stand on their own and showcase that character and whatever else. And I love those movies. Don't get me wrong. You know, like those are some of my favorites. They're just a good time. But when it comes down to like something different, something that really gets people to go to the movies, gets people who aren't interested in comic books at all to actually enjoy them. Like I went to go see Joker with Nate and one of my other friends, and both of them are not comic book people, and they ended up really liking it, and for different reasons. Like, that's the kind of thing that I want to see more of, and that may even get people interested more in like DC properties and stuff like that. But I hope that, you know, people appreciating this movie shows them that there is room for that sort of thing, even if you can do it on the side and not necessarily call it canon and whatever else. I want to see them keep taking risks, and at the same time, I'm hoping this shows other properties like Marvel or even Star Wars that you can make like an offshoot movie with some of these IP and still make it different and unique and even like Oscar worthy, you know what I mean? Like, and I put that in quotes because it's like, what even does that mean? But there's like a sort of caliber of like acting and filmmaking that seems to make the Oscar list every year. And, you know, never in a million years would I have thought that something like this would have made that list. So if they can continue to kind of push that envelope, I think it's going to work out really well for them. But that's not going to include sequels. It's just like, you can't keep, again, it's lightning in a bottle. You just can't keep hoping to make a Joker movie and then hope that it gets to be Oscar nominated. I think they just have to keep trying with different properties. And as much as stuff like Suicide Squad people really rolled their eyes at, I still enjoyed the fact that they tried something different. So if I can just, you know, keep encouraging them to do that, I think we're going to get some really cool stuff. And again, I want to see that from Marvel too. I don't want to keep seeing the same stereotypical superhero movie. You know, it's like we've seen it multiple times. They're always really good because they have a good cast, they have good direction and writing and whatnot, but they're never going to be quite like this. So that's kind of what I've been hoping for what's that movie? New Mutants? Or no. Is that what that's called? What's the one that's like coming out soonish that's like a horror movie?
It's probably New Mutants.
New
New
Mutants.
Mutants. Okay, yeah. Like
April something, unless it gets pushed
yeah,
up.
which as much as we've heard from that and all of its reshoots and stuff, I'm scared, but like that's kind of what my hope was for it, was that it was gonna be something just completely out of left field, because, you know, like we've had so many like bad mutant movies. It's just like, I just want something else. Like, don't even go back to Professor X and all that stuff. Like, I just want something else, and I was hoping that that would be it. Even the Doctor Strange movie, it sounds like it's gonna be very like psychological and creepy and stuff. I'm like, yes, like just keep giving me some of that weird
more of a
shit.
horror movie. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't even like horror movies, but just seeing something different from them using the characters that I know, I think is really interesting. You know, it's kind of like there's a lot of like really random like offshoot like comic books and cartoons and things like that. Things like they had that Batman Ninja or whatever, and that wasn't even really like a good movie, but I still watched it just because I was like, it's something different, you know, and I'm kind of into it, and it's weird and just fucking doesn't make any sense, but it's awesome. So that's me though. I'm always happy to get more of like end games and things like that, of course, but I like the direction though.
I say another thing to add in for Joker as an achievement for it, and maybe something that could help influence some movies going forward, is the fact that it passed $1 billion in the box office and was extremely low budget to make, especially compared to other comic book movies.
Yeah.
And that, you know, it shows too that you don't have to have an inflated budget movie and, you know, shit tons of special effects to pull in $1 billion. And, you know, maybe that we can get some movies. I mean, some movies, yeah, you definitely need to spend that money.
Mm-hmm.
But there are other movies where they rely too heavily on the special effects, and it's like, yeah, you don't necessarily need that. You can cut back
Right.
on the effects, lower the budget, and just focus on telling a good story.
Yeah, totally. And I know that's going to be dependent on like what characters you're really talking about cuz like you said like something like an end game you're never going to get away with like a small budget, but you know, even like Doctor Strange even like I can't see that having a small budget cuz you need to have all those crazy special effects happening. But yeah, like some of those like smaller characters that don't require a lot of like effort with like whatever powers or whatever that they have, something like Joker where it's just like a very like psychologically messed up man. It's like at the core of it, like it's a very like simple idea that I think is very simple to pull off that can still be really good. It's a challenge to be sure because obviously superheroes are super because they have something super about them, but I think they can at least take a note from like the way that that movie was like written and shot and the settings and things like that. Cuz like I said, something even like a New Mutants or something along those lines, even if it's not super like oh the superpowers going off everywhere, it's like, if you're just breaking it down to the baseline like themes, if it's just like psychological horror or something like that, like just make that movie, but then you can kind of sprinkle in a little bit of that like oh but they're mutants, and that may not work out. I don't know, like I'm not a filmmaker, so I couldn't tell you how to do that job. And like I said, in any universe I concocted, something like this Joker movie would have never like done well, but it did, and I don't know how they can replicate that with other sort of similar characters, but I don't know. And I almost feel like maybe not even superheroes, like maybe you keep doing that with villains or something, like, having like a Penguin movie sort of situation where it's like this corrupted politician creepy guy. It's like you break it down to the
I've,
most simple parts and maybe it'll work.
I've seen a few people calling online for a Lex Luthor movie in the same style as.
Yeah. Something. I don't know. Maybe it has to be something that we haven't really gone down either. Like you'll see Lex Luthor in like the all the superhero or Superman movies and stuff like that, but it's like yeah, like if they can do another sort of similar situation where it's like an offshoot of his own sort of movie, it could work. But yeah, it's really hard to I think it's going to be hard to do with characters we've already like seen. Like it's not going to be like a canon thing. It has to be something that is completely removed or else it's going to get messy. Like bringing back like Doctor Strange again, I think they can do a lot of really cool things with it, but it's always going to be that same character. There is not going to be like making Benedict Cumberbatch act in a different way that's going to bring any sort of like different conclusions from it. I think you have to just like start over and say this isn't necessarily like canon, or if it is canon, it's just like so far removed you don't really see any of the vestiges of like what was there before. And that's exactly what I'm hoping that Star Wars does. Going back to Star Wars, it's like that's exactly what I want, is just something that's so far removed from the story that we've already told that you're giving yourself creative freedom to give something else. Sometimes having that sort of like already built out for you, having the entire universe built for you, it can be a shackle for writers and other like, very creative people because you feel like you have to keep telling that same story. So, yeah, I think this can be like a beacon for other franchises if they really want to like sort of push the envelope. Like it's cool, but you just kind of have to like not be afraid to like go against like the canon and stuff like that. And that may piss off some people, but for people like me at least, I can appreciate the comic book aspect and the fact that they're trying to do something else. So, yeah.
Unfortunately, given Warner Brothers' history, I'm assuming they're just gonna learn the wrong lessons from
Yeah.
this.
I know. And it's like you just can't force these companies to draw the same conclusions because again it always comes back to money and however they can get the most of that. But I don't know, I mean, they took a chance on this. It could have totally not worked and it did, so who knows. I hope for the best for them though. DC in particular, because like I said, like they just had a string of kind of like poopier movies, your typical superhero movies, but that they still weren't even that great. So it's just kind of like they need to do something different if they're gonna compete at all. So we'll see. Um, Bagman, did you have a runner up for your best movie of the year?
I do. Jojo Rabbit is my runner-up movie.
Oh yeah, tell me about this movie because I've heard about it. Obviously, I've not seen it because like it's just it doesn't really seem like my kind of thing. But I can appreciate like Taika Waititi and what he does, so I've heard a lot about it, but I don't really know much.
It's a comedy film set in Nazi Germany during just before the fall of Hitler's empire and everything, and it's a lot more than just a basic silly comedy. It's very much a silly film, and anyone can kind of enjoy it, and it's just funny, but at the same time, it's very tragic and very emotional, and it really is all about love and compassion, and it's beautifully filmed and choreographed, and the jokes are timed very well. It's very good.
Cool. All right, so it's leaning more on the comedic side then, and not like something that's gonna be bogged down in World War II, Hitler stuff, Nazi stuff.
Well, it
Is it gonna
it,
make me
it kind
cry?
of it'll make you cry. It
Ah,
will. It makes me cry. It leans on comedy for about the first half, but it does take a turn, and it becomes more. You're laughing, and then you realize that what you're laughing at is suddenly taken away because it's still Nazi Germany, and it still really does a good job of showing how terrifying the Nazis really were.
yeah, that makes sense. I mean, yeah, it's I like when people sort of take themes and situations, even historical ones that like we already sort of know, but then giving it a spin so that way you can still sort of see that impact, but in a different light. And it's kind of like how they always say like comedy is like very close to drama just because of like uh how close of like an emotion like you can so quickly turn from one to the other, and that's usually what makes a really good movie is being able to sort of have both elements presented but mashed up in a way that like makes sense and makes you really feel something. I think that's really smart, and from what I've heard of this movie, like it sounds like they did a really good job of like portraying something like Nazi Germany, but also being able to kind of get away from like the sad facts about it. Like the stuff that we always see with like war movies and things like that. It's like, no, this is like that, but like a little bit different. You're getting it from a different perspective, and you're not necessarily just like bawling throughout the entire thing.
Yeah, it's different to most films because it's not from a soldier's perspective. It's from a 12-year-old Nazi boy's perspective, and it's the basic plot without going into spoilers is it's a Nazi boy who's been brought up uh, in Nazi Germany, goes to the Hitler youth camps and everything, finds a Jew in his house, and that's the basic plot. And you see the dynamic, and it goes. It's very over the top with the silly things that the Nazis say as propaganda, and it is hilarious. But at the same time, it deals it very well. It deals with the tragedies of World War II, and it was just a really really good film, one of the best. It I could compare it to Joker in the way that it portrayed the themes that it wanted to portray, and
Mm.
uh, I mean, if it had come out a lot sooner, I probably would have used that on my movie course in school because it's so good to analyze as well, and
Yeah.
also like if you like comedy films, you're gonna love it as well because it is hilarious. It had me laughing the whole way through, and then crying, and then laughing again.
Yeah, that's really it's really interesting to see, especially because like like comedy I think is really hard to like make into like a quote unquote good movie or whatever. There's obviously very good comedies out there, but they're never like held into very like high esteem because it kind of feels like cheap just to like get laughs and make that into like a good movie. But it's especially hard to make comedy also like mean something. And you'll get sprinkles of like comedy here and there and like dramedies or whatever, but like actually being able to lean on comedy and still tell a very like heartfelt story is like, it's really like commendable because the way you describe the movie, it reminds me of like, other movies like The Boy in the Striped Pajamas or whatever, where it's the same thing, where it's like a German boy meets a Jewish boy, and they have like very different sort of perspectives and experiences and stuff like that. And something like that is just like so goddamn sad, But like being able to take that and infuse comedy in such a dire and awful situation, it's like that takes a very like strong balanced hand, like you have to be very careful, especially considering that it's a very like delicate topic, like how do you make something like Hitler and Nazi Germany into like something that's funny. So yeah, like it's one of those like movies that I've been interested in. I don't know, I'll probably watch it at some point, like maybe like a cheap rental or something. I kind of put it off just because like I don't really go to see movies very often, but like just the concept of it and obviously the people who have made it have sparked my interest. But yeah, I think that's a really good pick because obviously people really like it. And it's not it by any means like a dark horse or anything. I think it did a really good job at what it was trying to do. So yeah, it's a really good pick. Tom, did you have a runner up?
I guess I kind of stick with the comic book theme would have to probably be Spider-Man: Far From Home. I mean, for a couple of reasons that I'm a big, huge Spider-Man fan, but then also again back to the Marvel consistency and that itself played off well off of Endgame with Peter having to deal with everything that happened, and I really think Tom Holland did such an amazing acting job in that movie as well.
Yeah, and that's I think again one of those like sort of typical superhero movies that just work so well, and I think that Marvel in particular has just found the sort of like the the formula for making really good like superhero movies, and I think it just continues. Like they never seem to like run out of ways to make that feel fun and fresh and something that you want to go and see multiple times over. But yeah, like I really like that movie, for sure. Like it wasn't like necessarily one of my favorite Marvel movies, but I think it could have gone really wrong, and it's still sort of like maintained its rightness, and I'm glad that it did because I like Tom Holland as Spider-Man. I'm totally up for like Spider-Man hijinks and all of that. I'm totally up for like seeing more of those Spider-Man villains because they're so like iconic, and I always like to see like how people like sort of make them come to life and like change them and whatnot. Because like even with Homecoming, you had like someone like Vulture, which I feel like every time that has been portrayed, it's always been like kind of just like this cranky looking old man or whatever, and you turn it into like this disgruntled like ex employee or whatever. In this movie, you've got like Mysterio, who's really kind of just like a narcissistic. Was he like an actor? I think or special
Now he's a
effects.
Stark. In the comics, he was a visual effects guy for
Yeah,
movies, but
yeah, it was kind of like I could totally see that kind of person in real life, and it kind of felt like fresh because they're using things like drones and like real like special effects that you see like in movies and stuff like that. So it's kind of like it kind of feels like, oh yeah, this is Mysterio, but like 2019's take on Mysterio kind of thing. So
yeah, that's what I thought was funny. Talk about you like using real movie visual effects. That like once I have spoilers for anybody who hasn't seen it yet, but when Mysterio, you find out what his plans really are and stuff, and you see about how he's using holograms, that it was really just Jake Gyllenhaal in a real life motion capture suit. And I laughed at that. That I'm like, yeah, it's like a motion capture suit that they wear in the movie and
Yeah.
CGI something over, and he's wearing that as like a costume in the movie.
Yeah, totally. It kind of does like reflect like how those movies are even like made. Obviously not with crazy ass drones and shit, but yeah, it is kind of like a fun nod to like how those movies are made and all the different like special effects that they do have to like employ in order to make you the viewer think that that stuff is like real and whatnot. So yeah, I think they did a really good job, and I also kind of liked that they sort of introduced like a semi psychological element where it was kind of like, Mysterio messing with Spider Man's mind and tricking him into thinking, like, this is real, this is not real, whatever. I think that was really cool because it kind of introduced, like, something we haven't really seen in that sort of realm, like the Spider Man sagas and everything else. I think we're going to get more of it with things like Doctor Strange, but I'm glad that they sort of gave us a little bit more than just like, yeah, this is just like a dude with drones. Like he was really like kind of like fucking with like people's minds and stuff, and I thought that was really cool.
But yeah, I definitely like it. It's just again going back. I think it's a big part of. I mean, as much as I'm a Spider-Man fan, like you said about how the movie easily couldn't work, I think Tom Holland really did carry so much, and like he's still like he's not entirely young, but he's still a relatively young actor in his early 20s. I just think when he gets older too, he's going to be a really phenomenal when he gets a lot more experience too.
Yeah. Oh yeah, for sure. And I think they did a really good job with like casting as usual. Like, obviously Tom Holland I think is a really good Spider-Man, just being that kind of like naive young kid trying to figure out all of his powers and things like that. I think Jake Gyllenhaal, I hate saying his name because it's just like uh I think he did a really good job too, because like I like that when they take like quote unquote real actors and sort of like infuse them into these movies and see like what they can bring or whatever. And he's one of those that like I feel like he could put on a lot of different faces. And I wasn't sure how he was gonna do with like a sort of more, I want to say like a lighthearted sort of role. I mean, obviously he was still kind of like a villain and murderous and whatever else, but at the same time, like this is the Marvel, the typical hero movie. You can't be like this creepy, like dark, like he can definitely go that to that realm, and so he kind of had to like pull back into more of like a sort of comedic, lighthearted role, and I wasn't sure how it's gonna work, but I think he pulled it off pretty well too. Like again, being that like sort of like narcissistic, like I deserve all of this stuff, but still very like smart and calculating and manipulative and everything else. So I really liked him in it, and I hope that they sort of take all of the iconic Spider-Man villains and make like a Sinister Six movie with all of them, because I would love to see who was it, Michael Keaton I think was Vulture, like
Yeah,
seeing him and like Jake Gyllenhaal and whoever else they end up picking like in the future for all these different things. I don't know if like
I
you
still
know
think that's the plan, and
yeah, I
I
could totally see it.
they may rush it now with the next Spider-Man movie if Marvel is worried that they're not going to get another shot at it if there's going to be
Mm.
no more further deals with Sony, and that's I'm kind of worried about them rushing it because I don't feel like the Sinister Six is ready for the next.
Yeah, well, and I like that they're kind of taking a movie to show like each one as much as they can anyway, because I mean there's six of them, and I don't know if they're gonna be able to make six movies. They got like offshoots like Morbius and things like that, but like yeah, like are they gonna do something like an offshoot for one of those villains and then bring them back? Like I don't know how that's gonna work, but I
Well,
would
depending on
love
who
to
they
see a
have in their
Sinister Six
lineup, you
movie.
could have potentially well like three or four already because you have Vulture. They could always stick Shocker in there, even though he was just kind of more like a just a thug with the gauntlets working for Adrian Toomes. You
It's
have
true.
Matt Gargan who becomes a Scorpion in prison. I mean, that character was introduced even though he hasn't become the Scorpion yet. And then
Right.
Mysterio if he's still alive, which it's always open since this whole thing was illusion. And like I said to somebody that, is one of the lines he said near the end of the movie was, they'll see what I want them to see. So
Mm-hmm.
they could easily just say that he's alive.
Yeah, and I think it would be like a waste to just like throw away that character right now because yeah, it that's like one of the few things like we have not really seen on the big screen yet is like a big old Sinister Six movie. You know, we keep getting like the sprinkles of like, here's Green Goblin over here, here's Doc Ock, but then it's like you don't see them come together, and I think that'd be amazing. It's like you have the coming together of all of the different superheroes and stuff like Avengers, but like where's the coming together of all the villains, you know? Like that's really what I love to see cuz that hasn't really been like done yet. They just keep, you know, piecemealing it along and now they're not even like connected. Like I think Electro was like another one of the Sinister Six and he was in a different trilogy. You got Green Goblin and Doc Ock in different trilogy. It's like
And the lineup's always been kind of different depending on,
yeah.
what iteration. Like I think there's been multiple versions in the comics, and you had like Spider-Man animated shows and video games and stuff.
Yeah, exactly. It's like they could make it whatever they wanted, I guess. I just kind of like hope for at least like the big ones. Like I really want to see them do like another take on like a Green Goblin or Doc Ock cuz those were like, you know, some of the most iconic ones. I would say right now they're taking ones that people know but like not necessarily like the most iconic, you know, like when you think of like Batman, you're going to think of like, you know, the top ones and you're not going to think of like the more out there ones. So I'd really like to see them continue on this track as long as possible, but yeah, I hope they don't run out of time to do something like a Sinister Six movie because I think it'd be badass. So yeah, especially if they keep getting all these big actors for it and stuff too. Like I would love to see them all in one room and see them interacting with each other. I think it'd be really cool. I'm kind of a sucker for like um whatever you call those movies, like combination movies or whatever, like team movies.
Ensemble.
Yeah, ensemble. Yeah, that's a better term for it. Yeah, like you know, like, and I know, like I said, like Suicide Squad did terribly, but like something like that, I'm just like such a sucker for because I love seeing all those different characters that you kind of already know about working together and mashing together and whatever else. So yeah, I think that'd be interesting. But yeah, I hope they continue on that track because you know, like I said, that those movies will never really be like quite like, you know, Oscar caliber, but they always just do a good job. And it's like, you know, you just want to keep seeing them do a good job. So I'm totally happy to keep getting more Spider-Man movies, of course. I'd say for my runner up, I'm really caught because Parasite I saw recently. I actually saw it like kind of late compared to a lot of people, and I wasn't sure what to expect from it because it came off as like a horror movie to me at first when you just see the thumbnail because it's got a very creepy picture of like people standing and sitting and then they got these like black bars on their faces and stuff and I was like, oh god, I don't know what that is, it looks creepy, but I keep hearing about it. And so I finally gave it a shot and then I realized, oh, this is like, you know, straight up like Korean movie with subtitles and whatever else. And I was kind of amazed that people were talking about it so much considering that it was an international movie. And I watched it, subtitles and all. I'm not really a subtitle person. So I was kind of like, oh god, I don't know how I'm gonna like this. Because I prefer to just, you know, like watch the movie and not have to like read the movie. But obviously in situations like this, you just don't have a choice. And I think it would have been so much worse if they dubbed over it. So I was like, okay, I'm just gonna deal with it. And it was a really good movie. And now that has won like the actual like Oscars, you know, film of the year or whatever. Which kind of blew me away because not only the fact that like this is like an international movie that kind of got like a cult following and people were really talking about it, but like that it just didn't feel like that typical sort of like Oscar winning movie or whatever, but it was still really good. Obviously had a lot of like sort of metaphors for like the rich versus the poor and like who actually is the parasite in society and stuff like that. Did a lot of really weird things like going places with the story that I did not expect whatsoever. It's described kind of similar to how Jojo Rabbit was, where it was uh like a comedy but also like kind of like a tragedy. And so it's really hard for me to explain like what exactly it is to people, but I definitely recommend that people give it a shot, even though it does have all of those very like strange, non-typical elements of not even being in English, not necessarily being like your typical dramedy movie or whatever. It was very interesting. It kind of just like made me keep thinking about it, and I think that's why it was so powerful, because it just was like one of those where I was just like I kept picking up on things as I kept thinking about it. The cast of it, I don't know them obviously, because if they're like any kind of famous Korean actors I wouldn't know them at all, but I think they did a really good job, especially together. I think like they all made like a family of very like poor, destitute kind of people who are very desperate to make their lives better. And I think they really pulled that off. And yeah, it was just like I don't know. It's one of those that I think like people should watch, but it wasn't like my favorite movie ever, obviously. Like I'm always going to be more biased towards something like Joker and things like that, but I say give it a shot. If you're going to give any like subtitled international film a shot, I would recommend it, you know. And on top of that, while I think that that was a really good movie and it was just like, I mean, just blown away by really good reviews and stuff, I also want to bring up like a movie like Uncut Gems, which I also just watched recently. I'm like really late on watching some of these movies because, like I said, I don't really go to the movie theater very much. But that movie also I thought was really good. Obviously, like a more of your typical American like drama movie, but it like it had Adam Sandler in it, and I was like, okay, how is this gonna work? You know, like Adam Sandler is just a really like goofy actor that makes his own sort of kind of movie that sort of like has the same feelings to it every single time, but like they're your typical like comedies or whatever. But then I hear about him being in this movie and just being like absolutely like insane bonkers, and I'm like, okay, I gotta see this shit. And so I watched it, and I mean, the whole time I am like sitting on pins and needles, just being like, holy shit, this is crazy. What's gonna happen? Oh god, I don't know what's gonna happen. No one else is freaking out as much as I'm freaking out. Like, it was kind of like it. That also was another one that took me by surprise. I'm trying really hard to like start watching some of these movies that people are saying are like critically acclaimed and whatever else, because obviously there's got to be something about them that people like if they keep talking about it. And I can understand why people really would like Uncut Gems, because it's like an actor who doesn't usually do this pulls it off so well, plus the fact that like, you know, it's just like a very simple concept, but it just makes you like stress. And I've never had such a sort of like visceral reaction to like a movie before, other than maybe like a horror movie, because horror movies are meant to sort of give you that stress, but this was just more like I am in this guy's shoes and I am wigging out right now. So
Sandler's one of those people that he's actually is a pretty decent actor, but he just usually takes the easiest road and, you know, doesn't mind playing to the lowest common denominator.
right, totally. And like I said, like he is no stranger to like making his own like films and whatever, and they're usually kind of like the same sort of movie, just a comedy about like a guy and doing whatever, and you know, it's just like you know what to expect from him. And then he pulls out this shit and you're just like, where the hell has this guy been? And it really it blew me away. It was also just like one of the most like fucking like vulgar movies I have ever seen in my life. I am no stranger to like cussing and whatever else and blood and whatever else, but like I was just like, God, this movie is just
Oh yeah, I read that it's
gritty.
like out of all the movies released of all time, I think it was number 7 in terms of most times the word.
I don't doubt it.
So like, out of all movies in history, it's like number 7 on the list.
I would not doubt it. I was like I'm pretty sure they couldn't go a sentence. At least Adam Sandler's character. I'm pretty sure he couldn't go a sentence without saying like fuck or something like just awful. And I'm just like, oh my god, do these kinds of people exist? But it was interesting. Like it just like he really embodied that character, you know? Like it was just this really like kind of grimy uh underground sort of like gems dealer or whatever, and like, you know, his shop or whatever was just like a typical looking like jewelry store you'd see at the freaking mall or something, but like the the shit that he's going and doing behind the scenes, I'm just like, oh god, like do these kinds of people exist? He's like getting in with all these like gangsters and shit, and like getting in with like celebrities and stuff, and it's just very like cutthroat and all that, and it just makes you wonder like, god, do people live like this? But yeah, he just did a really good job, like sort of taking on that really sort of like grimy, gritty character, and telling a very, very stressful story about his life. It was also kind of interesting because it was set in like, mm, I think it was like around like 2008 or 2010 or something like that. So it was kind of like an interesting time period. It wasn't like old. The music of it was also very jarring for me because it it sounded like it was sort of like 70s, but the movie itself is set in like 2010s ish, and then like I mean, and then everyone in it kind of looked like they were from like the 90s. I mean, it kind of felt like it was all over the place in terms of like the actual like style of it, but it also sort of worked too. It was just like bonkers, man. Like it's another one that just kept making me think about it, and I was like, what did I just watch? But yeah, I mean, I'd say like between those two, those are probably my runner-ups. I can't really choose between the two because they kind of feel similar to me, where it's like it's not my typical you know, cup of tea, but they were also like really good for like what they were, and I could like, you know, appreciate what they were doing. Um so yeah, I don't know, just like something, if you really are just like wanting to watch some fucking bonkers ass movies, like I'd say those two are pretty good. um but yeah, if there's any other movies you guys wanted to talk about, feel free. Otherwise, we can kind of get to like a semi vote. Since we got three people, I guess we have tiebreakers, so it might be fun to see.
Well, I guess I can put in a runner up for me is what I just saw last week. It was the tail end of 2019 Jay and Silent Bob reboot, which, you know, I've said I don't feel that it's Kevin Smith's best movie, but it was still funny and entertaining to me, and it was pretty good, you know, in terms of like a movie series and stuff, to just kind of like go in and see where some of these characters are after, you know, well, almost 13 is about 13 years since the last movie is by that, and just kind of see like where some of these characters are in the universe and how things are going. And like since the, the first Jay and Silent Bob movie, the Jay and Silent Bob Strikes Back in 2001, like Kevin Smith's been like each movie he's put out has been kind of trying to wrap up the universe, and he always keeps like adding more onto it and stuff. Actually, there's only been I guess three since then, but still, it's like each movie has always kind of been good to wrap up that universe. And you know, I feel the same with this one. Like if this ends up being the last one, I still feel that it's, you know, a good enough way to, you know, wrap up the universe and kind of say goodbye to a lot of these characters.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, you know, like obviously I think fans are gonna really appreciate them coming back and like making another movie and stuff like that, sort of showing like where they've been, where they're going, sort of thing. I've never watched any of them, but I think that's nice though. I kind of like when like uh, either
I
characters or actors or whoever like
think you'd
decide to
actually
come
like
back.
him, given what I know about your.
Say what?
I said you actually like him, given what I know about your humor. So
Yeah, probably. It's like one of those things that I always kind of like passed in the movie store, you know, like picking up rentals and stuff, but never really gave it a chance. But you know, if I ever find it like on a streaming service or something, I'd give it a shot for sure.
besides like you know, dick jokes and weed jokes and stuff. It's also just like a lot of general, nerd humor, like Star Wars and Lord of the Rings, and especially with the Jay and Silent Bob one, given the height of Marvel, it's a lot of Marvel jokes.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and I obviously like, I'm a fan of that stuff, so it's just like nerd culture 101, like sign me up, baby. Bagman, did you have any other ones?
No, I watched a lot of movies, but I think those are the only two that really
Stood out.
I think stood out.
Yeah. Yeah, I can understand that. There's a lot, like I feel like there was a lot of like super like random ones, like, obviously Star Wars came out, but I wouldn't necessarily put that on like anyone's like top movie lists or whatever for last year, just because I think it finished out what it needed to do, and that was about it. I enjoyed it, but like it wasn't like the best thing ever. I saw like Knives Out, expecting it to be like, the way, again, how everyone talks about it. I thought it was going to be like the greatest thing ever. It was okay. I really like the whodunit sort of genre, and I think it did that to a point, and then it kind of turned it on its head, but not in the way that I really wanted it to. It almost filled up the balloon and then just let out the balloon. And I was like, oh, okay. So, good movie though. Lots of really good actors in it. So if you kind of like that sort of like Clue, who done it sort of thing, uh, it was fine. The actors did really well in their characters, but it also kind of like took a little bit of the wind out of my sails. So that was one of the reasons why I didn't put it very high. Um, I saw Booksmart, not when it came out, but like a little bit later, because again, I heard it was like really good or whatever. And I would say that for people who like sort of that, uh, especially if you are like a teenager or like a high schooler or a college kid or something, this is like the Mean Girls of this generation, I feel like. And even as like an older, not old person, but like an older person out of that sort of realm nowadays, like I can still like really appreciate that it's just like a really fun sort of teeny bopper movie that I could totally see like younger people enjoying today. Definitely lives up to the sort of like Mean Girls sort of movies, because those always felt like, while they're not like good movies, they're just like really fun iconic movies. Sometimes movies are just there to like, be something that you'll turn on the TV and just watch over and over again, and that's kind of what this movie felt like. Really cute. The actresses in it, like they didn't pull a lot of like big names, so I was like, oh, like these kids, like I've never seen them before, but they're actually really good. So I hope that they turn out to have really good careers from this. I really appreciate when movies pick out like people you haven't really seen before, and it gives you an opportunity to kind of get to know them, especially in other things. So they did a really good job with the casting with that. I really liked those kids. I'm trying to think. I did see. I would say like Snowy was bringing up horror in the chat, which I'm not a big horror person, and that's also why I put off Parasite for so long. But I would say like It Chapter 2 and Us, I believe both of those came out last year, were probably like my top picks for like the horror sort of genre. But again, I'm not a big like horror person, so in terms of like, is it actually gonna scare your pants off? No. But I liked them because they were doing something different with the sort of horror genre, and it wasn't all about like, I'm just gonna scare the living daylights out of you. It just felt a little more like an actual story, or like an actual like idea, rather than just being scary for scary's sake. So I would recommend those. I really want to make myself watch Midsummer, because I feel like it will probably be the same way, where it's like scary but not just like bleh scary. It's just like psychologically scary. I can always appreciate those, but oh god, I don't know. I've heard it's very scary, so I'm scared to watch it. But of
Yeah,
the
I'm
ones
not a
I've seen,
huge horror fan myself.
yeah.
It's like even like modern horror, they films they they lose the aspect of trying to be scary and just replace it with an excuse to have gore.
Right. Or like weirdly have like nudity and shit. I'm like, I'm supposed to be scared right now, not like turned on. What's happening?
Or I've
I
heard
kind of
about
hate
like
that.
lot of modern horror films just take the easy way out and try to do jump scares, like
Yes.
have things like jump out at you and
Yeah, exactly. And that's the kind of horror that I do not like. I cannot watch it because it's not only cheap, but it also gets me every fucking time and I hate it. So I don't like watching horror just for the sake of being like jumped out of my skin every time. So that's kind of why I was drawn more towards something like It or Midsummer or Us, because they're giving you something more than just I'm gonna scare you out of your skin, and I can appreciate that. I like when they're digging deep in your brain to find ways to really freak you out, you know, and that's the kind of horror that I would prefer to watch. I want to be scared by like an idea and not a boo. So yeah, those are probably my recommendations for horror. But again, I'm sure actual horror people would probably have better recommendations. But they're not bad. And like I said, like even if you're not into horror, I would still recommend them just as movies in general because I thought they brought some interesting concepts, and it in particular, both of them, part one and part two, I just like the characters in them and not necessarily the actual like it part. So if you like especially like the kids, if you like things like Stranger Things, you'll probably like it part one, and then if you like the typical sort of like horror movie, gotta destroy the bad monster thing at the end sort of movie, you'll probably like it part two. So yeah, I'm just kind of, I don't know, I like the it like IP, I guess. I don't know if you could call it IP since they've only really had like a one other movie series thing with it, but I always kind of found that character interesting. So yeah, but those are probably my picks. So thank you guys having a little chat with me about some movies, because I thought it was like, I think that this year's Oscar like nominations and stuff like that, while some of them were typical, other ones were also very surprising, and we had a lot of really like sort of interesting nominees and whatnot or for last year. Plus the fact that like even ones that weren't nominated, I wanted to kind of get everyone's picks. Um, for the best movie of last year, what is your vote? Now kind of go through each one. So who here out of the top three, I guess, would pick Avengers Endgame as the best?
I'm raising my hand for that one.
Yeah. Bag and I. Mm. How about the Joker? And let's say you can vote for more than one, because obviously we're going to each pick our own.
Yeah.
I
I
could go Joker.
yeah, I
Okay.
could probably side with Joker.
Hey, and I side with Joker too. What a surprise. And then obviously we all voted for that one, so I feel like that's the winner, but does anyone also vote for sorry, John Wick? God, that just escaped my brain for a second.
I vote John Wick 3.
Yeah. I mean, I actually, oh, it's really hard for me, but I kind of vote for John Wick too. Not two, but also
I
um
haven't seen it, so I
yeah,
mean,
which I mean, I know like yeah, it's kind of hard to vote since
I
you haven't
could
seen
like
it.
it, but it's like
Yeah.
I don't know, about voting for a movie I haven't seen.
Yeah, for sure. Um Definitely recommend. But yeah, I kind of do too. And the only reason why I didn't vote for Endgame was just because I kind of think I liked Infinity War better. And so I kind of am like, I don't know if I would vote for that for like my top pick for last year. It was obviously super duper awesome. And like I said, I have a hard on for ensemble movies, and that was like the ensemblist of ensemble movies. But something about it, I just kind of preferred the other one. So that's the only reason why I didn't vote for it. Whereas John Wick, I think just continues to get better and better, and I really enjoyed that movie too. Definitely watch John Wick. They're really good. Even for just like shooty pooty action movies, they're really like good and like fluid and just like are cool. And they don't bog you down in a bunch of like character development stuff. It's just like, bro, this is just a cool ass movie with cool ass shit happening. So definitely recommend it. But yeah, I guess Joker kind of wins our Monstrosities best film of the year, at least from the three of us, which is exciting. Which
I guess yeah, it's just a movie with potentially like a widest
the white is like, yeah, like
in terms of like it could be a lot of different things to a lot of different people to appeal.
yeah, yeah, exactly. And like I said, it's just one of those that I think comic booky people will like for what it is. I think people who just like good movies in general will like it for what it is. So I think it checks all the boxes. There obviously were issues with it, but I think there's issues with every movie. So, it's just one of
Not
those
John
things.
Wick.
But not John Wick, damn it. That was a flawless movie. Oh, yeah, but no, I think we talked about a lot of really good movies. So, I don't envy anybody who has to vote for like best film of the year every year cuz it would be very hard, I think, for me especially. It's like when people ask me like what's your favorite movie? What's your favorite band? It's just like I don't have an answer for you cuz I like so many different things for so many different reasons. So, but Joker definitely I think checked all the boxes that I was looking for last year. So, that's why it would be my pick. It was not only a very good comic booky movie, but which using one of like my most favorite characters ever, but the fact that it was just like really well acted and everything else too. So I was just like, I was very impressed by it. So I think that's a good pick. But yeah, thank you guys for hopping on talking movies with me. I super duper appreciate it. Hopefully, Bag, you feel better soon.
I hope.
Yeah, I feel like we've all kind of been plagued with some like bad luck lately and sickness and whatever else. So,
Good
but
health and good fortune to all of us.
yeah, for sure. We'll try to be on maybe next week if we can think of another good topic to discuss. I think this one obviously like, was a little more relevant with like the Oscars and whatnot. So, we'll probably be back next week. We'll kind of chat about, what all we want to talk about in the Discord as usual. So, I will maybe sort of see you next time. Bye-bye.
Later.
Alright, guys, thank you so much again for hanging out with us today. Let's go ahead and see who is live right now. By